Winnebago Spring Rally. Winnebago.
Now's your chance.
You've got it made right in your own backyard.
The brave, the
You
best
can
value
easily
on the
get
road.
lost in that big 32-foot split level
The
trailer.
Indian,
Just look at all
America's
those rooms
best-selling motorhome. The Chieftain, the total luxury, and the all-new Mini Winnie, the first mini.
It's not hard to see that Americans are absolutely in love with their recreational vehicles. If you've been on an American highway during the summer months of like June through August, you've probably seen thousands of them on the expressway on their way to a weekend getaway at a campground or a weeks-long trip to scenic destinations. Most people like RVing because it's an escape from the everyday humdrum of ordinary life. Modern RVers now usually travel with all the luxuries of home. They have flat screen TVs, king-size beds, recliner chairs, all the comforts of home you'd ever want. But some people, they wonder, what's the point of escaping from everyday life if you're just gonna bring it all with you? On the opposite end of the RVing spectrum, there's people who like to travel with the bare necessities. They just bring their bed along. Teardrop campers and tiny travel trailers are becoming increasingly popular as more and more Americans are looking for a cheap and affordable way to travel the country. They get their name from their often rounded shape of their design that looks like a teardrop. These tiny campers often consist of a main cabin area, which has a bed, which serves as a sleeping area, and often some cabinetry on the inside. But also, many include a galley or kitchen area on the rear outside of the tiny camper that is concealed by a hatch and can be opened up when you get to your destination to use as an outdoor kitchen. Unlike traditional RVs that are often mass-produced and identical in design, most teardrop campers you'll see on the road are absolute one-of-a-kind. That's because thousands of people have decided to build them themselves, DIY style. But before we get to that, let's talk about why Americans are so obsessed with camping in the first place. In 2020, more than 11 million American households owned some kind of recreational vehicle, far surpassing any other region of the world. And that number is only growing. With the coronavirus in 2020 locking many people in their homes and prohibiting international travel, thousands of people sought an escape by purchasing a recreational vehicle. The RV market from 2019 to 2020 saw close to a 400% growth and an all-time high in sales. And that surge came on top of an already increasing number of young people in their 20s and 30s who are purchasing campers and recreational vehicles. Once a demographic saturated by retirees, millennials made up 56% of new RV owners in 2018. There's also the growing movement of van life influencers, who are people on social media that post pictures of themselves, often in home-built vans, traveling the country. They show images and videos of themselves in scenic locations and doing cool and interesting outdoor activities, and that is perhaps also growing the allure of outdoor exploration for young people. But this obsession with camping and traveling the country didn't just start with pandemic or van life influencers. Camping for recreation in America really hit its stride at the beginning of the 19th century. Before the advent of railroads and inexpensive automobile travel, moving people long distances cost a lot of money and resources, so it wasn't feasible for the average person to go on a long-distance tour of America. However, by the 1920s, incomes were rising and new technology like inexpensive cars allowed people to travel with less of a cost burden. Teardrop campers evolved in the 1930s and became extremely popular after World War II. With the booming economy after the war and the developing interstate highway system in the 1950s, America was on a path for more accessible outdoor recreation. The first DIY teardrop campers were made of surplus materials left over after World War II, with an abundance of industrial materials like steel tubing for a camper frame, vehicle wheels, and other industrial parts. People found a way to repurpose these parts by building these tiny trailers. Aluminum skins that were made for bomber wings were repurposed to waterproof these tiny trailers and gave them the shiny look that's characteristic of brands like Airstream today. Build-it-yourself guides for Teardrop Camper circulated as early as the 1950s, with woodworking magazines and newspapers advertising building a tiny camper as a new project. Unfortunately, during the late 1950s, bigger and better recreational vehicles emerged on the market, and tiny campers kind of fell to the wayside. The colossal beasts of the 1970s and 80s RV industry emerged with bigger and better campers that drew Americans to the idea that they can bring their home along with them when they go camping. Companies like Winnebago, Shasta, and Fleetwood really converted the industry into a multi-billion-dollar industry.
For better pricing and better service after the sale, shop Cousin Gary.
Grow Red, Phaeton Allegro Bus, and Zephyr, Tiffin's most luxurious motorhome.
Today, luxury motorhomes and travel trailers are kind of the norm for American camping, and they're great for families who need multiple bedrooms, a fully stocked kitchen, and space to live when they're on the road. But for many people, the cost of bringing all the comforts of a home with them is just too much. The average fifth-wheel travel trailer can run you upwards of $50,000, and you could easily spend like $500,000 on one of those big luxury motorhomes. I've always loved the idea of camping and traveling around with your own, little home. So when I saw a Teardrop camper on the internet in the summer of 2020, I was kind of obsessed with it. It seemed like an affordable way to start camping and enjoy the fun of getting out into the outdoors. COVID was happening, pretty much put a damper on anything else you could do during that time. So I said, hey, I got 3 months, nothing to do. I guess I'm building the camper. Pretty soon after starting the build, I realized it was going to take a lot longer than I had expected. And that was okay because I had the time for one, and there was something about thinking of an idea, designing it on paper, and then bringing it into reality that was just so fascinating for me. One of the problems DIY teardrop builders often come across is finding specialized parts for their builds, like small doors, aluminum trim, and other little bits and pieces that need to go on the trailer. I spoke to the owner of a business near Battle Creek, Michigan, whose sole focus is supplying specialty parts for DIY teardrop builders.
My name is Frank Bear, and I'm the owner of Vintage Technologies, and we sell teardrop trailer parts all over the world.
And when and how did Vintage Technologies begin?
Began in 1976. When I was asked to build my sister-in-law a teardrop camping trailer.
Okay.
She told me about a teardrop camping trailer, and I looked one up online, and I said, heck, I can build this. During the process of that, I designed some parts specifically because there was no help back then. And
right.
As a customer service person from a long way back, I decided I would start a company and sell some parts and help people that had questions on how to build them and teach people to build them, and it's been pretty successful thereafter. Everybody builds them.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had winos and I've had, brain surgeons. I mean, it's a pretty wide range of people. So yeah, I mean, there's no specific category or type of person that builds them. It's anybody with a love of the outdoors that's, it's got a little bit of skill.
After I finished my build, I felt the same way. That someone with a love of the outdoors and some basic skills could build their own teardrop to whatever level of complexity they need. And there's so many reasons people are building tiny trailers today. Now, I think one thing that draws people to tiny campers in particular is simply just their size and maneuverability. You can get places that the big guys can't. A lot of people like towing them to different trailheads and, secret spots that they only know of that you really can't get to with a big RV or a heavy trailer. So I'm not camping today, but I took the camper out to pretend I'm camping. Now, you know, a main reason that people decide to build teardrop campers is the cost, and that's often anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 is the average, I would say. And they'd rather do that. They'd rather have something that they built with their own two hands, and they know what's in it, what the quality is. Also, there's weight. So a major factor for people not being able to tow trailers is simply they weigh too much. So a teardrop camper usually weighs about 1,000 pounds, which you could really tow with pretty much any vehicle that has a trailer hitch. Now, when I started looking online and researching teardrop campers for my build, I did not expect the amount of resources on the internet. I was actually kind of shocked. There's a whole Facebook page of people called the DIY Teardrop Campers community on Facebook. There's a constant flow of discussion of people talking about build ideas, you know, resources that they used, tool tips, and there's a ton of YouTube videos also of builders who have built their own campers and are now kind of sharing their knowledge with everybody else. So if you're looking to build one, man, there's a lot of information to look at.
Hey man, how are you?
There, Michael. How you doing?
Doing good. You all right?
Yeah, I'm doing good. Your video is the other.
Well, that makes sense because your video is sideways on my phone.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go.
Michael Foster is one of those people you'll find online to help you with your build. After starting his own DIY teardrop build in 2018, he started a YouTube channel called Camp and Camera, where he shares tips and tricks of building a teardrop camper along the way and tells the story of the DIY teardrop camping community.
Well, now I have a large camper. It's like a 23-foot travel trailer.
Right.
But the places that we would want to go photograph, you really couldn't get a large camper like that into. I knew I had to get something small. Sure. And at first I just looked into maybe buying one, and I had no idea that these things were as expensive as they are. I mean, you could buy a teardrop camper for $25,000, $30,000 if you go to the wrong place.
Max it out, right?
Oh my gosh. So I thought, well, you know what, I'll build this thing on the cheap, and you know, I'll just build it myself. And that's how the whole thing got, you know, started.
Definitely.
So you've been to a lot of teardrop gatherings with other builders. What's been your experience with that community?
Awesome. I didn't even know the community existed. And when I got into the build, there were a few technical questions that, you know, some technical hurdles, I guess you could say, that I didn't know how to overcome. And I was trying to do some research on the net, and I found that, you know, I learned that there was a community. I didn't even know that was a thing. So I kind of got hooked into that community. We learned from each other, and it's one of the coolest things because when I go to like a tearjerkers rally or meetup, when you show up with your camper, it's like you guys are already friends, even though you've met each other, because you've got a common bond. I mean, I'll drive through a campground and there'll be $300,000 motorhomes sitting there parked up with all these utilities, and I come hauling in my little teardrop camper, and that's what they're in. And all of a sudden we're buddies, you know, because we've got, you know, both got little tiny campers. The people are, be honest with you, the people are probably the best part. I mean, I like my camper, but the people that it's allowed me to meet is probably the best part of the whole deal.
If you had to say anything to somebody that was thinking about building a teardrop, what advice would you give them?
It is way easier than you would expect. And literally, like I've said in my videos before, the whole teardrop going down the road is basically just a compilation of a bunch of little pieces, and you only build those pieces one at a time. And if you bite it into little chunks like that, it'll make the process so much easier. And most anybody probably can do it, even with some basic tools. And hey, the finished teardrop does not have to please anybody else. It only has to please the builder. That's all that matters.
Yeah, that's the beauty of building it yourself.